Hello, I was just thinking about our midterm exam coming up and thinking about some of these questions and wanted to share some information with you. First question was, describe key beliefs that Eastern Native Americans held when the British colonists arrived in the New World. Well, there were lots of beliefs that they had. Some of the most important ones are they believed in the Great Spirit, which was a life-giving source, and they thought that all life came from this Great Spirit. As a consequence of that, Native Americans felt that they were closely tied to their environment. They saw themselves as part of the world of nature, along with plants and animals and all living things. Each part of nature had its own spirit, and Native Americans certainly felt that they were part of that. Native Americans obviously were able to use the natural resources around them to survive, for food, clothing, shelter, and of course we call that adapting to the environment. And the Iroquois was a confederacy of 6 nations, you remember, and they had a constitution. Now a lot of people feel that when our founding fathers got together in 1787 to write their constitution, that they were inspired by this Iroquois confederacy and used many of the ideas that they found there. All right, there's a slide coming up. You can pause the video and watch the slide, take notes if you need to, and I'll be back. All right, question number 2. Describe the attitude of most English settlers toward Native Americans and their way of life. Well, it's not hard to describe their attitude. Simply put, most English thought that Native Americans were savages. I mean, after all, they didn't live in the right kind of houses, didn't wear the right kind of clothes, didn't eat the right kind of food, didn't speak the right kind of language, didn't have the right kind of religion. At least that's the way the English thought about them. They referred to Native Americans as savages. And so they had this attitude about them that they were not as good as the English, that their way of life was somehow inferior, and they just weren't as good. And the real ironic thing is that without the help of the Native Americans, the English wouldn't have survived, because Native Americans taught the English how to live in this environment. But that aside, that's the attitude that most English had toward Native Americans. And of course, you know that Native Americans had a similar attitude toward the English. For a man to live apart from his family, Native Americans couldn't understand that. They thought that was savage. And here are these stupid Englishmen, didn't know how to find food, didn't know how to survive in this environment. That looked pretty silly to Native Americans also. So this idea was mutual on both parts, but that's how the English felt about the Native. All right, the third question deals with examples of cultural diffusion between English and Native Americans, and there were just lots. We talked about the Columbian Exchange when we looked at the Europeans first coming to North and South America. Native Americans taught the English how to use the surroundings to meet their basic needs for water, food, shelter, clothing, all that stuff. Taught them how to adapt to their environment. Europeans learned about crops like corn, tomatoes, potatoes. They learned about tobacco from Native Americans, learned how to grow it in this environment. And it really helped the English, especially the English in Virginia and Maryland, to survive. Europeans introduced Native Americans to iron or steel tools and weapons, and also introduced Native Americans to horses. Of course, one of the real tragic things is that Europeans brought many diseases with them. Whether it was English, French, Spanish, Dutch, whoever came, they brought with them, they carried germs with them that Native Americans had no immunity to. So when they got these germs, they got the disease, and many died. Some estimate as many as 90% of Native Americans died from European diseases. Very tragic. All right, question number 4. Explain the reasons Englishmen first wanted to explore and colonize North America. Well, the very first thing English people wanted when they came here was gold. The Spanish came, and in Central America, South America, they found Native American cultures there that had tons and tons of gold, literally. And the English saw what the Spanish were getting, and they said, man, we're going to go get us some gold. But of course, when the English came to the eastern part of North America, they didn't find any gold there. But what they did find was a land rich in natural resources. And they soon learned to exploit that. So gold was the primary reason. Some Englishmen came here to convert the Native Americans. Their faith in God brought them here, and they wanted to introduce Native Americans to their religion and convert them to their religion. And some, of course, some people were just looking for adventure, for glory. So these are some of the basic reasons that English people came: gold, God, and glory. Probably in that order. Question number 5. Explain what made Jamestown and the Chesapeake colonies of Maryland and Virginia profitable. Tobacco. All right, question number 6. Explain how the Mayflower Compact, the New England Town Meetings, and the Virginia House of Burgesses were early examples of American democracy and self-government. Well, the Mayflower Compact, you remember the Pilgrims were on their way over. They were blown off course. They were supposed to go to Virginia. They landed instead in Massachusetts. That meant they didn't have a charter to live in North America, the official permission from the king. Remember, the charter told them how they were going to make laws, what some of their laws were going to be. And now all of a sudden they didn't feel like that charter was valid any longer. So they had to come up with a new way to govern themselves. So they all signed this agreement, this compact. And in this agreement they decided that they would all work together to make whatever laws they needed to make their life in this new world safe and productive. New England Town Meetings, another good example of self-government. Everybody in a small town would get together and they would make the laws that they needed. The Virginia House of Burgesses in 1619. Remember that England was so far away from the colonies, and this great distance meant that England couldn't make all the laws that the people needed. So England said to the colonists at Jamestown in Virginia, why don't you just elect people to make these laws for you day by day? You can send them over and we'll look at them and approve them if we need to. But you can govern yourselves. So these are 3 good examples of self-government in the colonies. Others would be the First and Second Continental Congress, where they were making decisions for themselves, and the Fundamental Orders in Connecticut, the first written constitution in the colonies. Okay, explain the triangle trade and what was traded at each stop along the way. You can see here, there are lots of different kinds of triangles that were formed. The basic thing that was traded, of course, was Africans who were used as slaves in the Caribbean, North America, South America. In the Caribbean, they would send sugar cane and molasses to North America, where they would use the molasses to make rum. They would take the rum and send it to Africa. They would trade the rum for slaves. The slaves would come to the Caribbean. There they would grow sugar cane, make more molasses, send it to New York, and it was just like a vicious merry-go-round. As I've told you before, a name that I prefer over triangle trade is the Atlantic slave trade. All right, number 8. Describe the goals of British mercantilism in America. In other words, why did England want to control its colonial trade? Well, you know that mercantilism was an economic policy of England that said the purpose of the colonies is to make England rich. And the way they did this was to control who the colonies could trade with. The colonies could only trade with England. The colonies had to send all their raw materials to England. It didn't matter if Spain or France or Portugal or some other country would pay them more for their raw materials. They had to sell their raw materials to England. On the other hand, they had to buy all their finished products from England. So say they could buy a table from France that was half as much as the same table from England. It didn't matter. England said, you have to buy all your finished products from us. The purpose of the colonies is to make England rich, and the way England could do that was to control its trade with its colonies. Okay, question number 9. List some of the most important results or outcomes of the French and Indian War. Don't forget to talk about how the war affected the relationship between the American colonists and the English government. Well, England, as you know, went to a great deal of debt fighting this war with France. The English attempted to get some money to pay back their debt by asking the colonies to pay taxes. The colonies didn't want to pay these taxes because they didn't have a voice or a say in what the taxes were going to be on or how much the taxes were or anything. And the colonies said, look, if we don't have a say in the taxation, it's not right for you to tax us. So the colonies got very upset with England trying to tax them without their permission or their consent. Another issue was that now, after the French and Indian War, England acquired a great deal more territory. They got Canada from France, and remember, they were fighting over control of the Ohio River Valley. Well, now England controlled the Ohio River Valley, but they didn't have the money to send an army here to protect the colonies from the Native Americans. So they told the colonies, don't cross the Appalachian Mountains. And the colonist says, you can't tell us what to do. We don't have a voice in any of this. You can't make laws for us without our voice, without our consent. And these were the major problems that the colonies were having with England at the time.